First Contact's Fatal Assumptions. Commander Krax stood before the Galactic Council's war chamber, his 4 eyes fixed on the holographic display of Earth rotating slowly in the center of the room. The planet's peaceful blue appearance masked what had become the most humiliating military campaign in the Empire's 3,000-year history. "Explain yourself, Commander," Supreme Counselor Vex's voice carried the weight of centuries of undefeated conquest. "How did a level 3 civilization manage to destroy our most advanced battalion?" Krax's facial tentacles twitched with embarrassment as he began his report. "Supreme Counselor, we made assumptions. Fatal assumptions." The chamber fell silent as Krax activated his neural interface, projecting the first battle footage. The scene showed the initial landing in what humans called Tennessee, a region chosen specifically for its supposedly primitive infrastructure and limited military presence. "We followed standard invasion protocols," Krax continued. "Our ships maintained high altitude to avoid detection. We deployed our most advanced stealth technology. We chose landing zones away from major population centers. Everything by the book." The footage showed the sleek, chrome-plated invasion force emerging from their dropships, their energy shields creating a subtle rainbow shimmer in the morning mist. Battle-hardened veterans of 100 conquered worlds, they moved with the confidence of superior technology and training. "That's when everything went wrong," Krax's voice cracked slightly. "The humans, they didn't fight like any species we've encountered. They didn't engage us directly. They didn't attempt to match our technology. Instead, they..." He paused the footage on an image of a simple earthen dam upstream from the landing zone. "They used the environment against us. They waited until our forces were crossing the river, then detonated primitive explosives to breach the dam. The rushing water didn't just disrupt our shield generators, it carried electromagnetic particles from the local geology, creating a cascading failure in our systems." Supreme Counselor Vex leaned forward, his crystalline eyes narrowing. "Surely our troops could handle primitive projectile weapons once their shields failed." Krax's bioluminescent spots pulsed with dark humor. "That's what we thought, Supreme Counselor. But the humans, they had prepared the entire valley. They didn't target our troops directly. Instead, they shot containers of a substance called tannerite, a binary explosive used by humans for recreation. The explosions weren't powerful enough to penetrate our armor directly, but they created pressure waves that disrupted our neural interfaces. Our troops couldn't communicate, couldn't coordinate." The footage resumed, showing alien soldiers in disarray, their advanced weapons firing wildly into the trees. From multiple hidden positions, humans emerged briefly to take precise shots with what appeared to be primitive chemical-propelled firearms. These weapons, Krax highlighted one in the footage, they call them shotguns. Primitive by our standards, firing metal projectiles propelled by chemical reactions. But their very simplicity made them effective. The pellets moved slow enough to pass through our energy shields, which were calibrated for high-velocity energy weapons. And in close quarters. He let the footage speak for itself as it showed alien soldiers falling to concentrated bursts of buckshot. Their armor, designed to deflect plasma bolts and energy beams, offered little protection against the spreading pattern of lead shot. But the most disturbing aspect, Krax continued, was their attitude. "Listen." The audio crackled with human voices, laughing and shouting as they fought. "Welcome to Tennessee, space boys. How's that hillbilly engineering working for you? Bet they don't have tannerite where you're from." They were enjoying it. Krax's voice carried a mix of disbelief and horror. "They turned our technological superiority against us and treated it like a game." Supreme Counselor Vex stood, his massive frame casting a shadow across the holographic Earth. "This is unprecedented. In 3,000 years of expansion, we've never encountered a species that..." He paused, searching for the right words, "that simply refused to fight the way they're supposed to." Krax nodded grimly. "It gets worse, Supreme Counselor. We've intercepted their communications. They're sharing tactics, adapting our weaknesses into what they call memes. They're turning our defeats into entertainment, spreading combat lessons through humor. Every failure we suffer becomes a template for future resistance. The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs as Krax displayed intercepted human communications, crude drawings and videos mocking the alien force's vulnerabilities, shared millions of times across their primitive information networks. And now, Krax continued, we're receiving reports of similar tactics being employed globally. In what they called Montana, they're using hunting rifles, weapons designed for sport, to pick off our troops from impossible distances. In Afghanistan, they've adapted ancient pit trap designs to capture our hover tanks. In Finland, He shuddered, well, we've lost contact with the entire Finnish expeditionary force. Supreme Counselor Vex sank back into his chair, his color shifting to a pale shade of defeat. How? How is this possible? Our technology, our weapons, our tactics, they've conquered 1,000 worlds. Perhaps, Krax offered carefully, that's precisely the problem. We've always relied on technological superiority. We've forgotten how to face an enemy who thinks differently, who turns simplicity into strength. The humans. He gestured to the holographic Earth, still rotating peacefully, they're teaching us a harsh lesson about assumptions. A junior analyst rushed into the chamber, delivering a data crystal to Krax. His facial tentacles went rigid as he read the contents. Supreme Counselor, his voice trembled slightly, we've just received word from the Australian front. The humans there, they're using something called emu warfare. I don't fully understand it, but we've lost 3 more battalions. The chamber fell silent again, the only sound the soft hum of the holographic display. Earth continued its innocent rotation, a deceptively peaceful blue marble hiding its nightmarishly creative inhabitants. New standing orders, Supreme Counselor Vex finally declared, his voice heavy with resignation. If you hear humans laughing during combat, retreat immediately. We cannot afford to learn what they find funny this time. As the council chamber emptied, Krax remained, staring at the holographic Earth. Somewhere down there, humans were probably inventing new ways to turn their primitive technology into devastating weapons. And worse, they were probably enjoying every minute of it. He thought about the classified reports still waiting for review, stories of humans using farming equipment as anti-aircraft weapons, converting civilian drones into precision strike platforms, and somehow weaponizing something called Florida Man. The Empire had arrived expecting to find primitive warriors. Instead, they found endlessly creative survivors who turned their very primitiveness into an advantage. And they weren't just surviving, they were having fun doing it. Krax's internal communication system pinged with another urgent report. He almost didn't want to read it. The humans had discovered something new about their technology, something else they could exploit. And somewhere, someone was laughing about it. The great Galactic Empire, with all its advanced technology and military might, was learning a lesson as old as conflict itself. It's not the sophistication of your weapons that matters, but the creativity and will of those wielding them. And humans, it seemed, had creativity and will in devastating abundance. Computer, Krax spoke to the empty chamber, update threat assessment for Earth. Previous classification as Level 3 civilization was. He paused, watching another piece of footage showing humans celebrating after destroying an alien command center with nothing more than fireworks and farming equipment, grossly inadequate. The holographic Earth continued its rotation, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones you underestimate. And humans, it seemed, excelled at being underestimated. The Montana Nightmare. Lieutenant Nova traced his claw across the burned scar on his neck chitin, a permanent reminder of his first ground mission on Earth. The memory made his scales ripple with embarrassment as he stood before the Imperial Military Academy's graduating class. You're here to learn from our mistakes, he addressed the young officers, their eager faces reminding him of his own naive confidence before Earth. I'm here to teach you why our most advanced technology failed against what we dismissed as primitive weapons. The lecture hall's holoprojector activated, displaying the snow-covered mountains of Montana. Nova's biorhythm spiked at the sight, but he forced himself to continue. 3 standard months ago, I led Recon Squad 7 into this region. Our mission was simple: assess local military capabilities and prepare for the main invasion force. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance. Just scattered settlements of level 3 civilians. Nova played the mission recordings, his voice growing tight as he narrated. We deployed at dawn, choosing a valley that our scanners showed was recently abandoned. Our intel suggested the humans had fled upon detecting our ships in orbit. We were wrong. They hadn't fled, they had prepared. The footage showed Nova's squad moving through pristine snow, their advanced armor gleaming in the morning light. Their confidence was obvious in their casual movements and relaxed formation. Our first mistake was trusting our technology completely. Our motion sensors showed nothing. Our heat detectors found no signatures. Our electromagnetic scanners detected no power sources or communications. We assumed we were alone. He paused the footage. We forgot something fundamental about humans. They don't need technology to be lethal. They've spent millennia learning to hunt in these conditions. They know how to remain motionless for hours. How to mask their heat signatures with simple materials. How to use the terrain itself as a weapon. The recording resumed, showing the first shot that changed everything. A simple projectile, moving just slow enough to slip through their energy shields, punched through Sergeant CLA's helmet. That sound, Nova activated the audio, letting the sharp crack of the rifle echo through the lecture hall. That sound haunts my dreams. Their primitive chemical-propelled projectiles, they call them hunting rifles, moved at exactly the right velocity to exploit the phase-shift frequency of our shields. The young officers murmured amongst themselves. One raised a hand. "Sir, couldn't we simply recalibrate our shields?" Nova's facial tentacles twitched in grim amusement. "We tried. The humans adapted. They started using something called subsonic ammunition when we adjusted for higher velocities, then switched to hypervelocity rounds when we compensated for slower projectiles. They turned our every adaptation into a new vulnerability." He advanced the footage to the avalanche sequence. But their true weapon wasn't their rifles. It was their understanding of their environment. Those seemingly random shots. They weren't trying to hit us directly. They were triggering avalanches, using the terrain itself as a weapon. The recording showed the wall of snow descending, sweeping away Nova's squad like toys. Our advanced armor, designed to withstand energy weapons and space combat, only dragged us down faster in the snow. Its weight became a death sentence. Nova switched to a different recording, this one from a rescue team's footage. It showed humans in white camouflage, moving like ghosts across the snow, recovering their simple weapons and disappearing into the landscape. We found this footage later. Look at their equipment: simple chemical-powered rifles, basic white clothing, primitive optical scopes. No powered armor, no energy weapons, no anti-gravity systems. And yet, he let the implications hang in the air. The young officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But the worst part, Nova continued, his voice dropping, was their psychological warfare. They knew exactly how to demoralize us. Listen. The audio played, human voices calling out in the midst of battle, their tones casual, even amused. "Welcome to winter in Montana. How's that high-tech gear working in the cold, boys? Maybe stick to invading somewhere warmer next time." They turned our confidence against us. Every piece of advanced technology we brought became a liability. Our powered armor froze and malfunctioned. Our energy weapons dispersed in the snow. Our communications were disrupted by the simplest atmospheric conditions. Nova pulled up another display, showing the aftermath statistics. 7 of our most elite recon squads were eliminated in the Montana region alone. Not by advanced weapons or superior numbers, but by humans who had spent generations learning to survive in one of their world's harshest environments. He switched to a final image, a simple human rifle, retrieved from the battlefield. This weapon is over 100 years old by their standards. Its design has barely changed. They call it a Winchester Model 70, a hunting rifle. Not a military weapon, not an advanced piece of technology. Just a simple tool that they've mastered over generations. The lecture hall was silent now, the young officers beginning to understand the true nature of the threat they faced. "You're wondering why I'm showing you this," Nova continued. "Why I'm telling you about our defeats. It's because we're facing something we've never encountered before, an enemy who refuses to fight on our terms. An enemy who turns their very primitiveness into an advantage." He brought up a map showing the global resistance. Montana was just the beginning. In every region, humans are using their local knowledge, their primitive but mastered technologies, and their sheer adaptability to counter our every advantage. In what they call Finland, they're using something called ski warfare, moving silently through forests on primitive wooden planks, striking our forces, and vanishing like spirits. In Vietnam, they've turned their dense jungles into death traps, using centuries-old guerrilla tactics that our advanced sensors can't counter. Nova's scales darkened with emotion. But perhaps most terrifying is their ability to learn and adapt. Every defeat we suffer becomes a template for resistance elsewhere. They share information at an unprecedented rate, turning our technological superiority into a handbook of vulnerabilities. He displayed intercepted human communications, crude drawings, simple text messages, and what they called memes, spreading tactics and techniques across their global information networks. They're not just fighting us, they're teaching each other how to fight us. Every victory they achieve becomes a lesson for others. And they're learning fast. A young officer raised her hand. "Sir, with our superior technology, surely we can still overwhelm them through sheer force." Nova's facial tentacles curled in a gesture of grim amusement. "That's exactly what I thought before Montana. Before I watched humans with 100-year-old rifles and simple tactics eliminate our most advanced reconnaissance units. Before I learned that sometimes, the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the most advanced weapons, it's the one who knows exactly how to use what they have." He switched off the holoprojector, leaving the lecture hall in contemplative darkness. "You're the next generation of Imperial officers. You'll be facing humans on battlefields across their world. Remember Montana. Remember that every piece of advanced technology you carry can become a liability in the right circumstances. Remember that somewhere out there, a human with a primitive weapon and generations of knowledge is waiting to teach you the same lesson I learned in those mountains." Nova touched his scar again, feeling the rough texture where the simple human bullet had grazed him. "We came to Earth expecting to find primitive warriors. Instead, we found masters of adaptation, turning their very primitiveness into strength. And most terrifying of all, they're enjoying the challenge of proving us wrong." The lecture hall remained silent as Nova's words sank in. Outside, Earth's sun was setting, casting long shadows across the Imperial Academy's grounds. Somewhere down there, humans were preparing new surprises for the Empire's forces. And they were probably laughing while they did it. "Class dismissed," Nova announced. "Tomorrow, we'll discuss the Australian front and why we now classify something called emus as a strategic threat. Prepare yourselves, it's not a pleasant lesson." As the young officers filed out, Nova remained at the podium, staring at the simple human rifle still displayed on the holoscreen. Such a primitive weapon, yet in the right hands, with the right knowledge, it had brought the mighty Galactic Empire to a standstill. He wondered what other surprises Earth's defenders had in store for them. Somewhere in those mountains, more humans were teaching each other their ancient hunting skills, preparing to remind the next group of overconfident alien invaders why technology alone doesn't win wars. The scar on his neck tingled, a permanent reminder that sometimes the most primitive weapon in the right hands is more dangerous than the most advanced technology in the wrong ones. The logistics of resistance. Major Riley Cooper sat in her makeshift command center, a converted storage room beneath an abandoned gas station in Afghanistan's Panjshir Valley. The walls were covered with paper maps. She'd learned early on that digital systems were too easily compromised by alien technology. Her desk, a simple wooden table, held her most powerful weapon, a notebook filled with hand-drawn diagrams of alien vehicle specifications, all labeled with their weaknesses. "Ma'am," Private Jenkins rushed in, his face streaked with dust, "they're taking the bait. The entire 7th Fleet's hover tank division is moving through the valley." Riley allowed herself a small smile. "Right on schedule. Who says logistics officers can't run combat operations?" 3 months ago, when the aliens first arrived, the military brass had dismissed her theories about exploiting the invaders' technological over-reliance. "Stick to supply chains, Cooper," they'd said. Now, after her successes in Tennessee and Montana, they'd given her carte blanche to implement what she called infrastructure warfare. "Show me," she ordered, following Jenkins to their observation post. Through binoculars, she watched the alien convoy, sleek, hovering tanks that could shrug off direct hits from conventional weapons. Their anti-gravity systems kept them floating half a meter above the ground, immune to traditional mines and terrain hazards. Or so they thought. "Status of Operation Quicksand," she asked. Jenkins consulted his notebook. Like her, he'd learned to trust paper over tablets. Local villagers confirmed the last of the pit traps were completed yesterday. Traditional Afghan design, just like you specified. The elders said their grandfathers used similar tricks against Soviet tanks. Riley nodded. The aliens had expected Earth's military to fight with their most advanced weapons. Instead, she'd gone the opposite direction, studying ancient warfare techniques from cultures that had perfected the art of defeating superior forces. "Time to see if our space friends understand basic physics," she muttered, keying her radio, ancient technology, but harder for the aliens to detect than modern communications. "All units, execute Phase 1. The lead alien tank approached the first trap. From her vantage point, Riley could barely see the carefully concealed pit, its wooden support beams disguised with local materials. The hover tank sensors would detect no electronics, no explosives, nothing but normal ground. The tank passed over the pit. For a moment, nothing happened. Then physics took over. The wooden beams, carefully calculated to support exactly 1 kilogram less than the tank's weight, splintered. The alien vehicle dropped suddenly, its anti-gravity systems creating a vortex that actually accelerated its descent. The quicksand mixture, an ancient recipe perfected by generations of Afghan fighters, did the rest. "Beautiful," Riley whispered, watching the advanced alien war machine sink helplessly. "Their anti-gravity actually makes it worse. The more power they apply, the faster they sink," Jenkins finished. "Just like you predicted." The alien convoy ground to a halt, their commanders presumably trying to understand what was happening. Riley keyed her radio again. Phase 2. From hidden positions in the cliffs, local fighters began rolling boulders, not at the tanks directly, but at precise angles she'd calculated. Each impact tilted the vehicles slightly, forcing their anti-gravity systems to compensate. The compensation created more instability, driving them deeper into the quicksand. "They're trying to abandon their vehicles," Jenkins reported, watching through his binoculars. But their emergency hatches are on the right side," Riley finished. "And our rock drops are pushing them left." By the time they realized their mistake, she didn't need to finish. The alien crews, wearing their advanced combat armor, were discovering another basic physics lesson: all that high-tech gear made excellent deadweight in quicksand. "Ma'am," Jenkins handed her a radio handset, "locals are requesting permission to initiate Phase 3. Riley took the handset, switching to the frequency they'd designated for the operation. "This is Cooper. You're clear for Phase 3. Remember, just like we practiced." Across the valley, ancient hunting horns began to sound. The haunting calls echoed off the cliff walls, accompanied by drums and chants that had remained unchanged for centuries. To the aliens, it must have seemed like primitive noise. It was actually a sophisticated communications network, coordinating the local fighters without any technology the aliens could detect or jam. "They're panicking," Jenkins reported with satisfaction. "Their formation is breaking down." Riley watched as the alien reinforcements, trying to rescue their trapped comrades, fell into carefully prepared secondary and tertiary trap zones. The more they struggled, the more their advanced technology worked against them. "Send the message," she ordered. Jenkins grinned, pulling out a simple hand-cranked radio transmitter, technology older than his grandfather. "Really going to taunt them again, ma'am?" "Psychological warfare, Private. Sometimes the oldest tricks are the best ones." Her message was simple, broadcast on frequencies she knew the aliens monitored. "Hey there, space friends. Thanks for testing our road maintenance project. Quick tip for next time, anti-gravity doesn't work so well when there's nothing solid underneath. Might want to update those tactical manuals." As if to punctuate her message, another alien tank disappeared into the earth, its crew discovering too late that their superior technology was useless against the simple genius of an Afghan pit trap. "Ma'am," Jenkins looked concerned, "incoming transmission from command. They're saying the aliens are pulling back globally, changing their entire tactical doctrine because of this operation." Riley allowed herself another smile. "Good. Maybe they're finally learning." She turned back to her maps, already planning her next operation. The aliens had come expecting to fight Earth's most advanced military technology. Instead, they were being defeated by knowledge passed down through generations, by simple physics, and by humans who understood that sometimes the best weapon isn't the most advanced, it's the most unexpected. "Jenkins," she called, "get me in touch with our friends in Vietnam. I have some ideas about how they can use their rice paddies to create some interesting problems for alien dropships." As she bent over her notebook, sketching new diagrams, Riley reflected on the irony. The aliens had dismissed her because she was, just, a logistics officer. They'd never understood that logistics, the science of moving things from point A to point B, also meant understanding exactly how to prevent things from moving. Somewhere above, alien commanders were probably rewriting their entire invasion doctrine, trying to understand how their superior technology had been defeated by wooden beams, quicksand, and primitive noisemakers. And Riley Cooper, the logistics officer they'd underestimated, was already planning her next lesson in human ingenuity. "Send word to all our cells," she ordered. "Tell them to start collecting bicycle parts. I have some ideas about how to turn pedal power into a real problem for alien sensor systems." Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "Bicycles, ma'am? Trust me, Private. The aliens are about to learn why the Viet Cong were so effective with just push bikes and determination." As night fell over the Panjshir Valley, the ancient hunting horns continued their haunting calls. To the locals, it was the sound of resistance, unchanged for centuries. To the aliens, it was a reminder that Earth's humans had spent millennia perfecting the art of asymmetric warfare. And somewhere in orbit, alien commanders were receiving reports about their devastating defeat at the hands of wood, sand, and stone. Their technology, their weapons, their tactical doctrine, all rendered useless by a logistics officer who understood that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. Riley closed her notebook, already thinking about her next operation. The aliens had brought space-age weapons to Earth. In response, she was teaching them why humans had survived and thrived for thousands of years, not through superior technology, but through superior adaptation, innovation, and the wisdom to use whatever tools were at hand. "Jenkins," she called, "get me everything you can find about ancient Greek fire. I have some ideas about how to make alien energy shields really interesting." The private hurried off, leaving Riley alone with her maps and plans. Outside, the sounds of alien defeat echoed through the valley. She smiled, remembering something her grandfather used to say: "The most dangerous weapon isn't the most advanced one, it's the one your enemy doesn't expect. The aliens were learning that lesson the hard way, one primitive but devastatingly effective tactic at a time. The Australian Gambit. General Zyxtal of the Imperial Sixth Fleet stared at the holographic display of the Australian continent, his facial tentacles writhing in confusion. "Explain to me again," he demanded, "how we lost 3 battalions to birds." Captain Mira, the fleet's xenobiologist, shifted uncomfortably. "Not just any birds, sir. Emus. And technically, we didn't lose the battalions to the emus directly. We lost them because of what the humans did with the emus." The command center of the Imperial flagship hummed with nervous energy as staff officers pretended not to listen. Earth's Australia had become a nightmare scenario for invasion planners, not because of advanced weapons or military resistance, but because of its ecosystem. "Show me," Zyxtal ordered. The holographic display shifted to ground-level footage from the failed Operation Outback pacification. The scene showed Imperial troops advancing across what seemed like empty terrain, their advanced sensors detecting no threats. Then the emus appeared. The humans, Mira explained, apparently learned from something called the Great Emu War in their history. They've weaponized these birds' natural behavior patterns. The footage showed hundreds of emus suddenly charging through the alien formation. The birds themselves weren't particularly dangerous to armored troops, but what followed was. The humans had studied the emus' migration patterns, Mira continued. They knew exactly where the birds would run when startled. Our troops, following standard protocol, activated their energy shields, which attracted every bull ant colony in a 5-kilometer radius, Zyxtal finished, his color darkening with frustration. The shield resonance somehow agitates them. The footage showed what happened next: swarms of aggressive ants, drawn to the energy shield's specific frequency, overwhelming the alien troops. Their advanced armor, designed to stop energy weapons and projectiles, had gaps that the tiny insects exploited. But that wasn't even the worst part, Mira added, advancing the footage. The humans, they were ready for our retreat pattern. The scene shifted to show alien troops falling back to their designated extraction points, only to find themselves in areas that the humans had quietly seeded with funnel web spiders and inland taipans, some of Earth's deadliest creatures. They used our own tactical doctrine against us, Zyxtal realized. They knew our standard retreat protocols would lead us right into their prepared killing zones. A junior officer rushed in, carrying a data crystal. "Sir, you need to see this. We've intercepted human communications about something called Operation Skippy." The holographic display updated to show new tactical data. Zyxtal's eyes widened in horror. "They're using kangaroos as mobile biological weapons platforms." "Worse, sir," the officer replied. "They've discovered that kangaroo pouches can hide from our bioscanners. They're using them to transport explosive devices past our security perimeters." Mira pulled up additional data. The humans have been studying their wildlife for generations. They know exactly how these creatures behave, how they move, what attracts or repels them. We're not just fighting the humans anymore, we're fighting an entire ecosystem they've learned to weaponize. The command center's main screen filled with reports from across the continent. In Queensland, box jellyfish migrations had been subtly redirected toward alien naval operations. In the Northern Territory, saltwater crocodiles were being used to disrupt landing zones. And in the outback, something called a cassowary had developed a disturbing taste for alien flesh. "Sir," another officer interrupted, "we're receiving disturbing reports about human activities near something called the Great Barrier Reef." Zyxtal sank into his command chair. "Do I want to know?" "They've apparently trained dolphins to recognize our underwater sensor buoys. The dolphins are playing with them, sir. Batting them around like toys. Our entire submarine detection network is being disrupted by marine mammals that think they're in a game." The general's facial tentacles curled in resignation. "Of course they are. Because apparently, on this nightmare world, even the aquatic mammals have a sense of humor. A tactical analyst stepped forward, displaying new data. Sir, we've compiled a list of Earth creatures that the Australian humans have successfully weaponized against us. You might want to sit down for this. The list scrolled past: spiders that could bypass shield frequencies, snakes that could sense shield vibrations, birds that could disrupt formation patterns, marsupials that could transport supplies undetected, and countless insects that could infiltrate the most advanced armor. How? Ziwextal demanded. How are they doing this? Mira brought up historical records. The humans here, they've spent generations learning to survive in one of their world's most hostile environments. They don't see these creatures as threats, they see them as tools, as potential allies. They understand this ecosystem in ways we never could. The general stared at the continent's image, its seemingly empty expanses now looking far more sinister. And they're sharing their knowledge, aren't they? Just like in other sectors. Yes, sir. We've intercepted communications showing they're teaching resistance groups worldwide how to weaponize local wildlife. The Vietnamese are doing something creative with monitor lizards, and don't even get me started on what the Brazilians are planning with their rainforest species. A new alert flashed across the command screens. Ziwextal read it and actually laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. They're using wombats now, he announced to the stunned command center. Apparently, their cubic droppings make perfect markers for underground resistance routes. The wombats maintain the trail network naturally, and our sensors can't distinguish their burrows from resistance tunnels. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. They had come to Earth expecting to fight humans. Instead, they were fighting an entire planet's worth of evolved survival mechanisms, guided by creatures who had spent millennia learning to coexist with them. New standing orders, Ziwextal finally declared. If you see a human smiling at local wildlife, retreat immediately. I don't want to know what they've taught it to do. As if to emphasize his point, another report came in. A platoon of alien scouts had just been routed by a group of highly territorial magpies working in apparent coordination with human resistance fighters. Sir, Mira ventured, perhaps we should consider that our technological superiority might actually be a disadvantage here. The humans have turned their intimate knowledge of their world's primitive but effective natural weapons against our advanced systems. Ziwextal nodded grimly. Send word to High Command. Recommend immediate review of all tactical protocols for Earth operations. And he paused, watching footage of a kangaroo casually hopping through an alien security perimeter with what was definitely not a natural bulge in its pouch, suggest they start studying Earth's evolutionary history. We need to understand what other surprises this death world has in store for us. As night fell over Australia, the Alien Command Center continued receiving reports of new and creative ways humans were turning their local fauna into weapons of war. And somewhere in the outback, resistance fighters were probably teaching emus new tricks, while their dolphins played keep-away with million-credit sensor arrays. The mighty Galactic Empire was learning a harsh lesson: sometimes the most effective weapons aren't the most advanced ones, they're the ones that have spent millions of years evolving to survive on a world that seems designed to kill. The Empire's final lesson. Supreme Commander Krax stood before the Galactic Council's emergency session, his usually luminescent scales dim with exhaustion. Behind him, a holographic Earth rotated serenely, belying the chaos it had unleashed upon the Empire's military doctrine. Counselors, he began, I come before you with a recommendation that in 3,000 years of Imperial expansion, no Supreme Commander has ever made. He paused, his facial tentacles twitching with emotion. I recommend we classify Earth as a Class X restricted world and withdraw all forces immediately. The council chamber erupted in protests. Senior Counselor Thex rose, his crystalline form catching the chamber's light. Explain yourself, Commander. How can a Level 3 civilization force such a recommendation? Krax activated his neural interface, projecting a series of images across the chamber. Because, honored counselors, we're not fighting a level 3 civilization. We're fighting something we've never encountered before, a species that turns technological inequality into an advantage. The first image showed the Tennessee incident, where Commander Krax's battalion had been decimated. Here, they used our own shield technology against us. Simple chemical explosives, placed with precise understanding of our protocols, turned our defensive systems into vulnerabilities. Next came Lieutenant Nova's nightmare in Montana. In this operation, they demonstrated that our technological superiority meant nothing against generations of accumulated knowledge. Their primitive projectile weapons, wielded with expertise, proved more effective than our energy weapons in their chosen terrain. The images continued. Major Riley Cooper's devastating campaign in Afghanistan, where ancient warfare techniques had rendered advanced hover tanks useless. The Australian front, where local wildlife had been turned into weapons that bypassed their most sophisticated detection systems. But it's not just their tactical innovations, Krax continued. It's their ability to adapt and share information. Every defeat we suffer becomes a template for resistance elsewhere. He displayed intercepted human communications, crude drawings, simple text messages, and what they called memes spreading tactics across their global information networks. They're not just fighting us, they're teaching each other how to fight us. And they're learning faster than we can adapt. A holographic display showed the Empire's casualties over the past Earth month. The numbers were staggering. We've lost more troops to what they call squirrel attacks than we did in the entire Centaurian campaign. Their Canadian Goose Squadron has disrupted more supply lines than the Proximan fleet ever managed. But surely, another counselor interrupted, with our superior technology, we can still overwhelm them? Krax's scales flickered with dark amusement. That's exactly what we thought. So let me show you our most recent attempt. The display shifted to show Operation Global Dominance, the Empire's massive push to overwhelm Earth's resistance through sheer force. Multiple images played simultaneously. In Vietnam, alien dropships had been ensnared by simple fishing nets, their anti-gravity systems tangled in primitive rope that their sensors didn't even register as a threat. In Finland, ski troops had eliminated entire mechanized divisions by using the terrain and weather conditions that they'd mastered over centuries. In Brazil, the rainforest itself had become a weapon, with resistance fighters using their knowledge of the ecosystem to turn every vine and insect into a potential threat. And then, Krax continued, there's what they're calling the Great Emu Alliance. He displayed footage from Australia, where coordinated movements of local wildlife had completely disrupted Imperial operations. They've turned their planet's evolved survival mechanisms against us. Every creature that should be prey has become a weapon. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Krax pressed his advantage. But perhaps most concerning is their attitude. He played audio clips from various engagements, humans laughing, joking, treating the defeat of superior forces as entertainment. They're not just resisting, they're enjoying the challenge. Every victory becomes a story, every defeat of our forces becomes a lesson shared through their primitive but effective communication networks. Senior Counselor Thex leaned forward. You mentioned a Class X classification. Explain. Krax's scales pulsed with emotional light. We need to create a new classification entirely. Earth isn't just dangerous because of its technology level, it's dangerous because its inhabitants have mastered something we've forgotten, the art of asymmetric warfare. He displayed a final series of images, simple human weapons that had proved devastatingly effective against advanced Imperial technology. Hunting rifles that exploited shield frequencies. Primitive traps that turned anti-gravity systems against themselves. Ancient warfare techniques that rendered sophisticated sensors useless. We came to Earth expecting to find primitive warriors. Instead, we found masters of adaptation who turn their very primitiveness into strength. They don't try to match our technology, they find ways to make it irrelevant. The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs as Krax continued, and now they're beginning to innovate. Major Cooper's resistance groups are developing new techniques daily. Lieutenant Nova reports that human hunters are teaching their children exactly how to exploit our vulnerabilities. Commander Krax's intelligence suggests they're developing something called meme warfare specifically designed to demoralize our troops. And your recommendation? Thex prompted. Full withdrawal. Classification of Earth as a restricted zone. And Vrax paused, his scales dimming further, a complete revision of our military doctrine. We've become over-reliant on technological superiority. The humans are teaching us a lesson our ancestors knew but we've forgotten. Sometimes the most primitive weapon in the right hands is more dangerous than the most advanced technology in the wrong ones. The council chamber fell silent again, the only sound the soft hum of the holographic Earth still rotating peacefully. Somewhere down there, humans were probably inventing new ways to turn their primitive technology into devastating weapons. And they were probably laughing while they did it. Motion to classify Earth as a restricted zone, Senior Counselor Thex announced formally. All in favor. The vote was unanimous, a first in council history. As the session concluded, Vrax remained, staring at the holographic Earth. He thought about Commander Krax, still trying to understand how simple explosives had defeated his advanced battalion. About Lieutenant Nova, who would always carry the scars from learning that ancient hunting skills could overcome modern warfare technology. About Major Riley Cooper, still teaching resistance fighters how to turn simple physics into weapons against superior forces. But mostly, he thought about the lesson Earth had taught the mighty Galactic Empire, that true strength lies not in the advancement of your weapons, but in the wisdom and will of those wielding them. And humans, it seemed, had wisdom and will in devastating abundance. Computer, he spoke to the empty chamber, update Imperial military doctrine. New primary directive, before engaging any species in combat, first check if they're smiling. If they are, retreat immediately. We probably don't want to know what they find funny. The holographic Earth continued its rotation, a deceptively peaceful blue marble hiding its nightmarishly creative inhabitants. The Empire had come seeking easy conquest and found instead a species that turned their every advantage into a liability. And somewhere down there, humans were probably already sharing stories about how they defeated the mighty alien empire with nothing more than sticks, stones, and a whole lot of creativity. The Empire had learned its final lesson. Never underestimate a species that can turn their primitive weapons into your worst nightmare, especially if they're having fun doing it.